They say a quiet man at the table is a man with nothing to offer. The real truth is that the quietest man in the room is usually the one who has already read everything on the table before anyone else sat down. My name is Raymond Holt, and I was 61 years old the evening my wife's family gathered in the dining room on Pemberton Drive and told me, with remarkable clarity and over a very good meal, that I was not the right kind of man for their daughter. The wallpaper in that dining room was ivory with a thin gold stripe. The chandelier made everything look warmer than it was. None of them had any idea what I had been doing for the previous 4 months. Welcome back to Channel, where the steadiest hand wins every time. If you've ever been the person in the room that everyone decided to underestimate, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My full name is Raymond Arthur Holt. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, in 1961, the third son of a postal worker and a woman who taught elementary school for 34 years on the same block where she had gone to school herself. I grew up in a house where the heat was always at 3 degrees lower than comfortable and where nobody announced what they were doing. They simply did it, and the results accumulated quietly over decades, and one morning you looked around and realized the foundation was solid and had been solid for a long time. I had spent 32 years as a federal circuit court judge, appointed to the Sixth Circuit bench in 1994, confirmed without significant opposition, and operating from a courtroom on the 4th floor of the Potter Stewart United States Courthouse on 5th Street in Cincinnati. My courtroom had 2 tall windows that faced west and caught the afternoon light in a way that made everything in the room look like it had been considered carefully. I wore the same 4 robes on rotation. I drove a 12-year-old Volvo. I ate lunch at my desk most days, a sandwich I made myself each morning from whatever was in the refrigerator on Maple Ridge Court, the house I had shared with my wife Catherine for 26 years before she died of pancreatic cancer on September 3rd, 2018. Catherine had been a cellist. She had played with the Cincinnati Symphony for 19 years and taught private lessons on Saturday mornings in the front room of our house, where the rug was always slightly crooked from the cello stand, and the window let in morning light that she said was the right kind for practicing. She died in the same room where she had taught 214 students over the course of her career. I counted them at her memorial from the program she had made me help her print the week before she died. 214 names in the program. I read every one. After Catherine died, I continued going to the courthouse on 5th Street every morning at 7:45. I continued writing opinions. I continued presiding over oral arguments. The work was the same work it had always been, careful, procedurally exact, and conducted under the particular discipline of a man who understands that the moment you stop paying attention is the moment the record diverges from the truth. I had built my professional life on the understanding that documents do not lie, that timelines do not lie, and that the most important thing a judge can do is read what is actually in front of him rather than what he expects to find. I had been paying the property tax on a house on Maple Ridge Court for 29 years, $4,800 annually, without interruption, through 3 recessions and 1 roof replacement, and the sum of the foundation needed repointing, which cost $11,000, and which I paid from savings without telling anyone, because it was my house and my responsibility, and that was the end of the calculation. I had paid Catherine's medical costs during the 14 months of her illness, the portions not covered by insurance, which came to $68,000, from the same account I had been contributing to since 1989, when I started on the bench and understood for the first time what a long career actually required in material terms. I drove her to treatment at the Christ Hospital on Auburn Avenue every Tuesday and Thursday for 11 months, and I sat in the waiting room on the 3rd floor with a legal brief in my lap that I read the same 4 pages of every time, because I could not concentrate and did not try very hard to pretend otherwise. The sealed document was the first thing I need you to know about. It was a standard court-issued assignment envelope, manila, sealed with the court's internal routing tape, my name printed on the front in the clerk's office font that I had been reading for 32 years. It had arrived on my desk on the 4th floor on the morning of July 14th at 8:19, delivered by the clerk's assistant, a young man named Marcus who had been working the 4th floor for 2 years and who always placed documents in the exact center of the desk blotter. I had logged it, initialed the routing slip, and placed it in my case file. I had not opened it immediately. I opened it at 9:03, with my coffee still hot and the morning light still coming in at the low angle it comes in at in July. And I read the case assignment in the way I always read case assignments, from the top of the first page to the bottom of the last, without skipping, without jumping ahead. I recognized the name on the third line of the first page. My stomach dropped once, the way it drops when something arrives that you are not expecting, and that changes the shape of the morning. I set the document down. I picked up my coffee. I set the coffee down. I read the third line again. Then I read the entire assignment from the beginning more slowly, and when I finished, I initialed the log sheet and placed a file in my case cabinet and called my clerk, a woman named Diane Ferris, who had worked with me for 14 years, into my office. "Diane," I said, "I need you to pull the full case background on the Whitmore matter. Everything filed through yesterday." She said, "I'll have it by noon." She had it on my desk at 11:47. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading it. The Whitmore family, my wife's family, or what remained of my wife's family now that Catherine was gone, were defendants in a civil fraud proceeding filed by 3 former business partners in connection with commercial real estate development on the eastern edge of Hamilton County. The case had been working its way through the district court for over 2 years and had arrived at my level on appeal. The lead defendant was Catherine's older brother, Garrison Whitmore, who was 64 years old, operated a property development company called Whitmore Land Partners from an office on Madison Road, and had, for as long as I had known him, treated me with a particular condescension of a man who has decided that a federal judge is less impressive than a man who builds things you can stand on. I had known Garrison Whitmore for 27 years. I had sat at his table for 27 Christmases and Easters and summer dinners. I had listened to him explain things to me. I had nodded. I had said nothing that would complicate the evening. And now his case file was in my cabinet on the 4th floor of the Potter Stewart Courthouse, and I had read it front to back, and the timeline of what had happened in the Whitmore Land Partners development deal was not ambiguous. The first named professional I want you to know about is Diane Ferris, my senior law clerk, J.D., University of Michigan, 2010, who had been pulling case files and preparing bench memoranda for me since 2011. On the afternoon of July 14th at 2:31, Diane placed a complete Whitmore matter file on my desk. 412 pages, tab indexed, with a 2-page summary on top in her precise handwriting. She had flagged 7 exhibits with yellow tabs and written a single question in the margin of the summary. Recusal consideration? I looked at the question for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called the Chief Judge's chambers. I want to go back to the dinner on Pemberton Drive, because that is where the wound was administered most clearly, and because the dinner did not happen in a vacuum. It was the accumulation of 27 years of smaller dinners, smaller corrections, smaller dismissals, each one individually survivable and collectively exhausting in the way that water is individually survivable and collectively capable of carving stone. The first time Garrison Whitmore made clear what he thought of me was at the Christmas dinner of 1997, 2 years after Catherine and I were married. The dining room on Pemberton Drive smelled of pine and roasted meat, and particular dry warmth of a house where the heat had been turned up for guests. The candles on the table were ivory and tall, and Catherine had placed them herself that morning. Garrison was 40 years old then, and already running Whitmore Land Partners with the confidence of a man who measures worth in square footage. He waited until the soup was cleared and then said, across the table, in the easy tone of a man making conversation, "So, Raymond, still doing the government work?" I said, "Still on the bench, yes." He said, "Good pension, I imagine." He looked at his brother-in-law beside him. "Safe choice." I said nothing. Catherine's hand found mine under the table. I did not look at her. By the Christmas of 2001, the pattern had sharpened. The dining room smelled the same, pine, roasted meat, the same dry heat, and Garrison had added a new line to his repertoire. The family had been discussing a property deal he had closed in Blue Ash, and the numbers were large enough that everyone around the table leaned in slightly, the way people lean in when money is being described in confident terms. "The thing about real estate," Garrison said, setting down his wine, "is that it rewards the people willing to actually put something on the line. Not everyone has the constitution for it." He looked at me. No offense to the public servant contingent. I nodded once. Something in me went still in a way I had learned to recognize. Not the absence of response, but the deliberate decision to hold one in reserve. The way you hold a document you are not yet ready to enter into the record. His wife, Meredith, said, "Garrison," a single word. He smiled and refilled his glass. By 2008, he had stopped softening it. That Thanksgiving, the dining room darker than usual because one of the overhead bulbs had gone and nobody had replaced it. The smell of sage and gravy and the cranberry sauce Catherine made every year from scratch in a saucepan on the back left burner. Garrison told me directly, in front of his two adult sons and their wives, that he had always thought Catherine had made a choice that was difficult to understand. She could have married someone who built things, he said. Instead, she got a man who decides what other people built. My throat tightened around the response I chose not to give. I said nothing. Catherine was in the kitchen. She did not hear this. For 27 years, I had driven to Pemberton Drive for every family occasion Catherine wanted to attend, and after she died, I continued going because they were her family and the continuity seemed right, and because I understood that grief takes different shapes in different people, and that Garrison's particular shape was to become louder about the things he had always been loud about. I attended the Christmas dinner 2018, 3 months after Catherine died, and I sat in the chair I had always sat in, and I ate the meal, and I said the things that needed to be said, and I drove home on Maple Ridge Court at 9:42 with the radio off. I had paid for catering at Catherine's memorial service for $1,200 through my own account because the family had offered to split the cost and then not raise the subject again, and after 3 weeks I stopped waiting and paid it myself. I had maintained Catherine's studio in the front room of the house on Maple Ridge Court exactly as it had been. The rug slightly crooked, the window unobstructed, the cello stand in its corner, for 2 years after she died, because it seemed like the correct thing, and because nobody told me otherwise. The dinner on Pemberton Drive in November of 2021, 4 months after the case assignment arrived on my desk, was the one that completed the picture. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and a candle Meredith had placed on the sideboard, something with a heavy vanilla note that Catherine would not have chosen. The table was set for 8. Garrison's 2 sons were there, Marcus and Philip, both in their 30s, both employed at various levels of Whitmore Land Partners. Catherine's younger sister, Denise, was there with her husband, and at the far end of the table, Garrison Whitmore sat in his chair at the head with the ease of a man who has arranged the room to his satisfaction. He had called me that afternoon and asked me to come. He had said there were matters he wanted to discuss. I had driven to Pemberton Drive at 6:45, parked the Volvo at the curb, and walked up the path to the front door. The second named professional I need to tell you about is the Chief Judge of the Sixth Circuit, the Honorable Margaret Sung, who had been on the bench for 22 years and who operated from chambers on the 6th floor of the same courthouse where I worked. On July 14th, at 3:15 in the afternoon, I had called her chambers and asked for 15 minutes. She had seen me at 4 o'clock. I explained the situation, the case assignment, the family connection, the degree of relationship. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Raymond, what's your read on it?" I said, "I believe I can be fair, but I want it documented that the relationship was disclosed and that you made the assignment decision, not me." She said, "I'll have the recusal memo processed by end of day. If you're comfortable proceeding, proceed. If at any point that changes, you tell me immediately." I said, "Understood." She filed the disclosure memo that afternoon at 4:57. It was in the public record. It named the relationship. It noted my disclosure and her determination that recusal was not required given the appellate, rather than trial level, posture of the case, and the nature of my role. The memo was 14 lines long and used precise, unadorned language of a document that expects to be read carefully by people who know how to read carefully. Garrison did not know this document existed. At the dinner table on Pemberton Drive in November, the roasted chicken going cold on the sideboard while Garrison refilled wine glasses and held court, he said something I want to quote exactly because it is the kind of thing that sounds like dinner conversation and functions as something else entirely. He said, looking at me across the table, "I've always thought Catherine's greatest quality was her loyalty, even when the choices she made didn't make logical sense to the rest of us." He paused. He smiled. "We loved her for it." I said nothing. His son Marcus laughed softly. Denise looked at the tablecloth. Then Garrison said, setting his glass down, Raymond, I think you know I've always respected what you do, in its way. But there's a kind of man who builds the world and a kind of man who sits in judgment of it, and I have always thought the second kind, no offense, is working with someone else's material. My hands went cold around my wine glass. I said nothing. He said, "Men like you don't last in a family like ours." Catherine understood that eventually. She was loyal. That was her nature. Something in me completed a very long calculation and arrived at its answer. My voice stayed level. "She was the best person I have ever known," I said. Garrison nodded, as though I had agreed with him. Philip said something about the property market. Marcus poured more wine. Denise excused herself to use the bathroom. I cut my chicken. I ate it. I stayed until 9:17, said goodnight to everyone at the table, thanked Meredith for the meal, and drove home on Maple Ridge Court in the dark with the heat on low and the radio off. My chest went very still on the drive home, not with loss, with the particular settling of a man who has just received the last piece of information he needed. I sat at my desk on the 4th floor of the Potter Stewart Courthouse the following morning at 7:52. The west-facing windows were dark at that hour in November. The sky outside still the flat gray of early morning, the radiator clicking in the corner with its irregular rhythm that I had stopped noticing sometime around 2003. The Whitmore matter file was in the cabinet to my left. I had not taken it out yet. I made my coffee from the small machine on the credenza, the same machine I had used for 9 years, a plain drip machine with a cracked handle that I kept meaning to replace. And I sat down and looked at the window and thought. I thought about the disclosure memo filed on July 14th at 4:57. I thought about 412 pages of case file, tabbed and indexed, with Diane's yellow flags at 7 key exhibits. I thought about what the 7th exhibit contained, a series of wire transfer records that told a story about timing and intent that was not consistent with the story Whitmore Land Partners had offered in their appellate brief. I thought about the 3 former business partners who had filed the original complaint, men whose names I had read carefully and whose documented losses were specific and calculable. I thought about what it means to apply the law to a set of facts without regard for who the facts concern. This is what I had done for 32 years. Every day, in every matter, without exception. The discipline is not natural. It has to be built the way the foundation of a house is built, below the surface, before anything visible goes up, in conditions that nobody photographs because there is nothing to see yet. I had built mine across 32 years of early mornings and careful reading, and the particular solitude of a man who understands that the record is the only thing that matters in the end. I thought about Catherine. I thought about the way she used to play in the front room on Saturday mornings, the cello's particular resonance in a room with plaster walls, the sound of it filling the house and going out through the windows onto Maple Ridge Court, where the neighbors would sometimes slow their walking to listen. I thought about the 214 names in the memorial program and the Saturday mornings that would not happen again. I thought about what she would say if I described the dinner to her. I knew exactly what she would say. She would say, "Raymond, do the work." I opened the case file at 8:17. I read it again from the beginning, not for new information, because I'd already internalized the timeline, but for the discipline of it, because a decision made on a second reading is more reliable than a decision made on a first. I finished at 11:04. I made a second cup of coffee. I opened my legal pad and began writing the outline for the panel opinion. The decision I made was not a decision about Garrison Whitmore. That is the part one want to be precise about. The decision I made was the same decision I made in every case, to read what was actually in the record rather than what any interested party wanted me to find, and to write an opinion that the facts supported and that the law required. That the interested party in this instance was a man who had spent 27 years telling me I was not the right kind of man was not legally relevant. It was personally noted. It was professionally irrelevant. I called Diane at 11:23. I said, "I want to schedule the panel conference for the Whitmore matter. First available date in December." She said, "December 9th. I said, "Book it." I continued going to the courthouse at 7:45 every morning. I continued preparing for the December panel conference. I continued maintaining the front room on Maple Ridge Court exactly as Catherine had left it. I drove to Pemberton Drive on Christmas Eve because the family expected it, and because Catherine would have gone and I was still going her place. Garrison poured my wine. I thanked him. I said very little. I drove home at 8:51 with the radio off. My stomach was steady on the drive home. The kind of steadiness that comes when everything is already in motion and the motion is correct. By January of 2022, Garrison Whitmore's confidence had reached a specific altitude. His appellate attorneys, a firm out of Columbus called Harker & Lyle, had filed a supplemental brief in December that his son Marcus described to me at a New Year's dinner as very persuasive. Marcus said this the way young men say things their fathers have told them to believe. The dining room on Pemberton Drive smelled of a new candle Meredith had placed near the window, eucalyptus this time, and the table was louder than usual with the noise of a family that believed the problem was resolving in their favor. Garrison said, across the salad course, "The appeal is in good shape. Our lawyers are excellent. I expect a favorable ruling by spring." I said, "I hope things work out for you." He looked at me with particular look of a man who does not recognize irony when it is offered plainly. He said, "I'm sure they will." I said nothing. His wife Meredith said something about the weather. Marcus talked about a new development site in northern Kentucky. Philip described the contractor they had hired. The conversation moved the way family dinner conversations move, in the direction of the loudest person in the room, and I sat with my water glass and listened and ate my salad. My breath caught once, very briefly, in the particular way it catches when you are sitting inside information that the room does not have. I let it go. I ate the rest of the salad. I refilled my own water glass. In February of 2022, Garrison called me on a Tuesday evening at 6:44. The connection was clear, and his voice was in particular register of a man who has decided to be generous. He said he wanted to talk about Catherine's estate, specifically about some items he believed should have been returned to the family after her death and had not been. He spoke for approximately 4 minutes. The items he described were not legally his to claim. I knew this because I had read Catherine's will with the same attention I brought to every document, and because Franklin Osei, yes, the same Franklin Osei who had handled my estate work since 2009, operating from his office on 4th Street, quiet and thorough and entirely unimpressed by the way things appeared on the surface, had drafted Catherine's will in 2016, and had confirmed to me at the time that the disposition of every item was unambiguous. I let Garrison finish speaking. Then I said, "I'll have my attorney reach out." He said, "I'd appreciate that." I said, "Good night, Garrison." I called Franklin the following morning at 8:58. I told him about the call. He said he has no claim. The will is clean. Do you want me to send a letter? I said, "Not yet. Send me a copy of the relevant sections with your annotations." He sent them by the end of day. I read them that evening at the kitchen table on Maple Ridge Court with a cup of tea and the particular satisfaction of a man who reads documents carefully and finds them exactly as clear as he expected. The third professional I need to tell you about is Howard Crane, the supervising clerk for the Sixth Circuit panel assigned to the Whitmore matter. Howard was 53 years old, had worked in the clerk's office for 21 years, and processed panel conference scheduling and opinion issuance with the mechanical precision of a man who understood that the court's calendar was as much a legal document as any brief file with it. On the morning of March 3rd, 2022, at 9:17, Howard filed the panel conference report with the court's administrative office, noting that the 3-judge panel had reached a decision in the Whitmore appeal and that the written opinion would issue within 30 days. This filing was public record. Anyone could read it. Anyone who knew how to read a docket entry would understand what it meant. Garrison's attorneys received the conference report that same morning. By the afternoon, according to Marcus, who called me at 4:43 in what I recognized as a controlled panic wearing a casual tone, the legal team of Harker and Lyle had indicated that the conference outcome was not what they had expected. Marcus said, "The lawyers are saying it might not go the way we thought." I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." He said, "Dad wants to know if you have any insight into how these things work." My hands went still on the desk. I said, "Marcus, you know I can't discuss pending matters." He said, "Right, of course. I just thought." I said, "Call your attorneys. They'll walk you through the timeline." I hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time. The afternoon light was coming through the west windows at its March angle, low and direct. And the courtroom below was quiet because it was late in the day and the last argument had finished at 2. The radiator clicked. I picked up my pen. I went back to work. Something in me had gone very quiet and very certain. The way things go when you have been patient long enough that the outcome has already happened and you are simply waiting for the paperwork to arrive. The written opinion issued on April 4th, 2022, at 10:08 in the morning. It was 31 pages. I had written 26 of them. The opinion affirmed the district court's finding of liability on 2 of the 3 counts and remanded the damages calculation on the 3rd for further proceedings consistent with the opinion's analysis. The language was precise. The record citations were complete. The opinion did not use Garrison Whitmore's name more than it used any other defendant's name. Howard Crane docketed the opinion at 10:08. The clerk's system automatically transmitted the filing to all parties of record. Garrison's attorneys at Harker and Lyle received it at 10:09. I was at my desk on the 4th floor at 10:15 when Diane knocked and came in. She said a single sheet on the desk, the docketing confirmation. She said nothing. I said nothing. She went back to her office. At 11:43, Garrison Whitmore called my cell phone. I let it ring. He called again at 11:51. I let it ring. At 12:07, he called the courthouse general line and asked for my chambers. My assistant, a woman named Patricia, who had been managing my chambers line for 11 years, took the message. She brought it to me on a pink slip at 12:15. It said, Garrison Whitmore called. Urgent. Please call back. I folded the pink slip once and set it on the left side of my desk blotter. At 2:30 that afternoon, I had a scheduled meeting in my chambers with Diane and the 2 law clerks of the term, a routine conference on pending matters. The room smelled of the coffee I had made at 2 o'clock and the old paper that was always in the room and the particular dry warmth of the building in April. I sat at my desk. Diane and the clerk sat across from me. We worked through the pending matter list for 47 minutes. At 3:17, I walked them to the door. I thanked them. I closed the door. I called Garrison at 3:22. He answered on the first ring. His voice was the voice of a man who has been waiting and has used the waiting to prepare what he was going to say. And then the waiting went long enough that the preparation had started to dissolve at the edges. He said, Raymond. I said, Garrison. He said, the opinion. I said, yes. He said, I didn't know. He stopped. He started again. I didn't know you were on the panel. I said nothing. His voice went careful in a way I had not heard before. Was that appropriate? I said, the assignment was disclosed in July. Chief Judge Sung reviewed it. The disclosure is in the public record. Your attorneys had access to the docket. The line was very quiet. His attorneys had access to the public docket for 9 months. The disclosure memo was 14 lines long. It named me by name. It named the family relationship. It noted the chief judge's determination. Any attorney reviewing the case assignment would have seen it on the first search. Harker and Lyle had either not searched carefully or had searched and decided the disclosed relationship would benefit their client. Either way, the document was there and had been there since July and was now, as it had always been, part of the public record. I said, the opinion was written on the record before the panel. If your attorneys believe there are grounds for further review, they can file a petition for a rehearing en banc within prescribed deadline. That information is in the opinion itself. He said, Raymond. I said, Garrison, I hope things work out for you. His face, which I could not see but could hear the shape of in the silence that followed, went still in the way a face goes still when the information has landed and there is nothing left to say. I said, good afternoon. I hung up. I placed the phone on the desk. I picked up my pen. I went back to the pending matter list. I had not finished. At 4:47, I closed the case file for the last time, placed it in the return stack for Howard Crane's office, and took my coat from the hook behind the door. I walked to the elevator. I rode it to the lobby. I walked to the parking structure on 5th Street. I got in the Volvo. I drove home on Maple Ridge Court in the April afternoon light, which was a warm, extended light of a day that has more of itself left than you expect. The Whitmore Land Partners matter concluded formally on August 19th, 2022, when the district court entered a damages judgment on remand in the amount of $2,340,000. The precise figure the three original plaintiffs had documented in their initial complaint, supported by the wire transfer records that had been Exhibit 7 in the case file, the one with Diane's yellow tab. Garrison's attorneys filed a petition for rehearing en banc on April 28th. The full court denied it on June 3rd, without comment. That denial took 11 words in the docket entry. I did not write those 11 words. I did not need to. Garrison Whitmore did not call me after the August judgment. Marcus called once in September to say that his father was dealing with some financial restructuring and that the family would not be hosting Christmas that year. I said I understood. I said I hoped everyone was well. I meant it. I drove to Catherine's grave on Maple Ridge Cemetery on September 3rd, the 4th anniversary of her death, with hydrangeas, the same flowers I brought every year, and I sat on the bench near the stone for 30 minutes and said very little, but thought about her with a particular fullness that comes when you've done something she would have recognized as correct. Franklin Osei sent a letter to Garrison's personal attorney in October regarding the estate items Garrison had raised in February. The response came back within 2 weeks. The items were not raised again. Raymond Holt, 62 years old, and driving home from the courthouse on April evenings with the radio off, and the window cracked, and the Volvo's heater set to the temperature Catherine always complained was too low. There is a difference between a man who performs his character in front of people and a man who maintains it when nobody is watching. I had been maintaining mine for 32 years in a courtroom on the 4th floor where the afternoon light came through west-facing windows, and the record was the only thing that mattered. Garrison Whitmore had spent 27 years deciding what kind of man I was without reading the record. The record was always there. He simply chose not to look. I still eat lunch at my desk most days. The cracked handle on the coffee machine is still there. The rug in Catherine's front room is still slightly crooked from the cello stand because I haven't moved it, and I don't intend to. Some things you maintain not because anyone is watching, but because the maintenance is the point. The quietest man at the table had been reading the file for months. He just waited for the right page. If you had been sitting at that dinner table in November of 2021, listening to a man tell you that you were the wrong kind of person, knowing what you knew, would you have said something? Or would you have eaten your chicken and driven home in the dark? Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.